Storytime: don't ever eat snacks at a sleepover. A few years ago, I went to a sleepover at my friend Lisa's house that turned into a nightmare experience I'll never forget. It was supposed to be a night of fun, games, and junk food, but it took a horrifying turn. At first, it was fine, but then Lisa's older brother suggested we play a game. It was simple. We would try snacks blindfolded and guess the flavor. It seems like it'd be fun, and I'm competitive, so I put on the blindfold. The first snack was easy, and we all guessed right. For the next snack, Lisa's brother said we weren't allowed to touch anything. We just had to open our mouths and eat the snack. The first taste I got wasn't bad. It kind of tasted like a strawberry Jolly Rancher. Out of nowhere, the girl next to me started gagging, and then I heard someone scream. I should have spit everything out immediately, but it was too late. I already started chewing. That's when the taste hit me. A sharp, earthy flavor that I couldn't figure out, and then it got worse. As I chewed, something popped open in my mouth, and this slimy stuff oozed out. I could hear everyone panicking around me, so I ripped off my blindfold and started spitting everything out of my mouth. When I looked down at the table to see what I was chewing, I was horrified. Giant grub worms, some of them still slithering, and pieces of candy shell. Someone started to vomit, and at least 2 girls were crying. It took me a year to even go to another sleepover, and can still feel grub worm insides oozing under my tongue. Storytime: I think they were graves. When I was in elementary school, I would go to sleepovers all of the time. That is until I went to one girl's house and found something that still gives me nightmares. I was a nosy kid, so I would always wander around my friends' houses and see what I could find. This one friend told me I wasn't allowed in her basement, so of course that was the first place I wanted to check out. When I was looking around, as soon as I opened the door to the basement, I felt something telling me to turn around and run. I thought it was just basement jitters, so I ignored it and started down the stairs. I wouldn't make it to the bottom before I would really wish I had listened to that feeling telling me to run. With every stair down, there was a sickeningly sweet smell covering up another smell that was unlike anything I had ever smelled before. I was about to turn around and run back up the stairs when my foot landed in something wet and sticky. As I tried to make out what I stepped in, I saw the reason why we weren't allowed in the basement, and I wished I had listened. In the dark, I could see there were holes large enough to fit a person in all over the basement floor. I was terrified, but I had to know what was in these holes, so I made my way over to look inside one. Just as I was peeking over the edge, a light was pointing down at me from the top of the stairs. It was my friend's dad, and he was pissed. I remember being scolded, and I remember the girl's dad washing my feet. I also remember being told I had stepped in red paint because the basement was being renovated, but I don't know if I believe that. I was so young I don't remember everything I saw, but the older I get, the more I think they were graves.
Storytime: he was buried alive. Years ago, I went to a sleepover with my closest friends, but there was one kid there that wasn't really part of the group. I was confused by him being there, but I just let it go. The night started innocently enough, with urban legends and creepy stories. That's when Jake, the guy's house we were at, said we should try a game he'd heard about called Buried Alive. The rules were simple, or so we thought. One person would lie down in a makeshift coffin we created from a large cardboard box, while the others took turns pretending to bury them with dirt and leaves from the backyard. The idea was to see who could withstand the darkness and isolation the longest. It sounded harmless, but the one random kid, Tim, really didn't want to do it. The rest of the guys kept pushing it, so he eventually agreed. Tim looked like he was going to cry before he even got in the box, so I tried to stop it, but everyone else thought it would be funny. Once Tim was in the box, Jake pulled out tape and told the rest of the guys to hold the lid down. My friends piled dirt on top of the taped cardboard box, and I could hear Tim's screams getting more and more desperate. Everyone was laughing and banging on the box, but I didn't think it was funny. As the minutes passed, Tim's screams turned to silence, and the guys decided to go inside. I tried to get them to let Tim out, but they left him taped in the box for hours. Finally, when everyone was asleep, I went to the yard to let Tim out, but the box was open and empty. The next day, at school, I tried to talk to Tim, but he just ignored me. I don't even blame him. I can't imagine what he went through in that box.
Storytime: I never went back. My friend Sarah wanted me to spend the night, and without really thinking much of it, I said yes. I thought it would be a fun night of hanging out, but it ended up being the most traumatizing experience of my life. Everything was fine until I got to her house and realized it was the house in our neighborhood that had a reputation, and not the good kind. They called it the doll house because Sarah's mother collected antique dolls. When we walked into the house, I realized right away that it smelled kind of weird, and then I started seeing them. There were dolls in every room, on the floors, on the dressers, and in the closets, but the dolls that stood out the most were a few special dolls in a glass case that looked a little too lifelike. I tried to ignore them, but knowing they were there made me so uncomfortable. Sarah decided to make the evening more interesting by suggesting we each choose a doll from the case to sleep with. It sounded like harmless fun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about those lifeless, yet strangely lifelike dolls. I picked a porcelain doll with long black hair and eyes that seemed to actually be looking at me. I tried to ignore my gut, but things started happening that I still don't want to accept. shocked. I expected the doll to be porcelain, but she wasn't, and when I touched her cheek it felt like skin. But the worst part is she was warm. I looked up to see Sarah was just watching me, and smiling. That's when she asked me a question I will never forget. She looked me right in the eye, and asked me if I wanted her mom to make a doll out of me too. Something about the way she asked me said it was more than just an inspired to look like me kind of doll. I felt like I was going to be sick when I looked at the doll, and it dawned on me. She looked just like a girl that went missing from our neighborhood the month before. I felt like I had to stay calm, so I asked to go to the bathroom, and snuck out. I left my things, and never went back to get them. I'm glad I will never know what I dodged that night. Storytime. Maybe she wanted to be me. I had this friend in high school. We'll call her Amy. We weren't super close, but I noticed Amy was always trying to copy me. Like if I wore a certain color, she would start wearing it, or if I put ketchup on my pizza, she would do the same. I for sure knew it was weird, but I thought it was harmless, until the day I went to her house for a sleepover. When I got there, two things seemed really off to me. One, I had no idea, but Amy lived super close to my house, and two, I was the only one there even though I was 15 minutes late. I met her mom, and that's when things really took a turn for the worse. Amy's mom introduced herself, and then went on to tell me how pretty I was. All of that was fine, but then she said something that made me feel sick to my stomach. She said, and I quote, "Amy, you should really pick uglier friends. It'll make you look less like a troll." I didn't know what to say or how to respond, so I was super grateful when Amy said we should go to her room. That is until we got to Amy's, and she opened the door. What I saw made my blood run cold. Amy's room was set up exactly like mine. There were a few minor differences, but her room was the same layout, same colors, and even had some of the same stuffies on her bed as I did. I didn't know what to do, so I just had to act like I didn't notice. I asked Amy about the other girls, and when they would be there. She just ignored me, and told me to sit with her on her bed. I agreed, but now I really wish I never did. I really wish I never even went to her house. As I sat on her bed I saw it, and that's when I was ready to go. From her bed you could see straight into my bedroom window. Out of nervous habit I grabbed one of her stuffies, only to see my initials on the tag in my mom's handwriting. I knew things were going missing from my room, even my toothbrush once. But this was so bizarre, and the strangest part is Amy had never been to my house, or in my room. I'd had enough, and made up an excuse to leave. After that night, things kept going missing from my room, and there were so many times I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like someone had just been touching my face. I'm not sure why Amy did what she did, but I think she wanted to be me. Storytime. Better her than me. My mom and I love to go to antique shops and estate sales. This one day I'm at an estate sale, and I see this really gorgeous hand mirror. I needed one for my vanity area anyway, so I bought it. When I showed it to my mom, she asked me why I would buy a broken mirror. I was really confused because the mirror looked fine to me just a second ago, but when I turned it around to look again, it wasn't fine. The entire glass part that shows your reflection was missing. I thought maybe I was wrong, and tried not to think about it, but I was positive the glass was there before. As soon as I got home, I took the mirror out and it was fine. As I was looking at the mirror, my mom called to me from the other room, and when I looked up in that direction I froze.